Welcome to the Tomorrow Zone Catalyst podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Rubin. This conversation is part of our Future Shaping Leaders series, inspired by my new book, Enter the Tomorrow Zone: How to Inspire Breakthrough Innovation and Shape Your Future. So in this series, we're exploring how senior leaders are thinking and leading while responsible for shaping the future inside of complex organizations and markets. Let's get into it. Today's conversation features Rich Vora. Rich is a senior vice president of sales at Leaf Commercial Capital, a subsidiary of M&T Bank. He brings over 25 years of experience in equipment finance, building and leading high-performing sales organizations and consistently delivering results across economic cycles, leading with a full life cycle perspective spanning sales, credit, asset management, and collections gives Rich a very unique ability to connect strategy and execution. His work is focusing on helping businesses to access capital with greater speed and clarity as he is shaping teams, systems, and culture for long-term performance. And he's actively exploring how AI is transforming both prospecting and credit analysis, shaping the future of commercial finance. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Deb, for having me. Very excited to spend the next 30, 45 minutes with you talking about AI.
Yeah, I'm excited for this. And actually, there was a post that you did on LinkedIn that caught my attention. You were talking about some of the opportunities that you're seeing in the back office. And we, got together and geeked out a little bit about our AI adventures, which we're going to dive into. But before we get into that, I would love if you could just kind of share a 30,000 foot view of the work that you're leading and some of the strategic focus behind it.
Absolutely. So at a high level, Deb, my focus is on scaling judgment across the sales organization to drive consistent, high performance outcomes. The strategic bet behind it is pretty simple. The next decade of equipment finance isn't going to be won by whoever has the best relationships. And it's not going to be won by whoever has the cheapest cost of funds. Both still matter, but they are table stakes. So the buyers are going to be Gen Z, and their approach to decision making is different. To achieve future success, I believe organizations must align with these changing environments. It's going to be won by whoever can systemize judgment the fastest. I think the firms that figure out how to take it with what they have with their best people to do by instinct and put in the hands of every rep, every underwriter, every analyst, I think that's where the durable advantage is.
That's a really interesting challenge to tackle. Scaling something as important as judgment at speed. But the other thing I love is the way that you're focusing not on the customer of today or the customer of yesterday, but you're really getting into the tomorrows on thinking about where your customer is going and how do we design our organization and our systems and processes for that future that we see. I really love that thinking. So let's dive in a little bit. What sparked your commitment, Rich, to that challenge that you're working on right now, and why does it matter to you so much?
So, AI didn't start as a strategic initiative for us. It started with us getting curious. We began using AI for small things such as drafting, summarizing, prepping for meetings. And at some point, we built a structured prompt for analyzing a deal. The output came back in seconds within, I'd say maybe a minute. And, this is something that would take, a credit analyst, the kind of thinking it would probably take maybe 40, 45 minutes to do. And we put it together within a matter of minutes. So, it took a few tries to get it right, but we eventually got there. And, that was the moment I stopped thinking about AI as a productivity tool and started thinking about it as a judgment infrastructure. So really, ultimately, it's how we began scaling the decision quality across the entire sales organization. Because, if you can systemize judgment, you can do something, we've never been able to do well in the industry. And that's close the gap between your top performers and everyone else. So in equipment finance, the RAM time, on a new rep is long. Turnover is expensive. The difference between a great rep and an average rep is enormous. And, most of it's pattern recognition. So you can't, teach it in a training class. AI changes the math on that. And that's why I believe it matters strategically. So it's not about doing the same work faster. It's about raising the floor of what a normal day looks like for every person in the company.
That's a really interesting concept. Just kind of recognizing what does it take to raise the bar on performance of your reps at all levels. Um, so when you began this journey, Rich, where did you choose to focus your energy and why? It sounds like, what the driver really was curiosity and experimentation. But then, once you saw, oh, there is something to this AI thing, um, you know, where did you really focus your energy and why?
So, I deliberately stayed away from the shiny stuff, no chatbots, no customer facing demos. I went straight at the unglamorous layer, underwriting workflows, sales training curriculum, the quality, of the data sitting in our Salesforce instance. The reason why, and anybody could buy a flashy tool, right? The actual mode is in the boring layer, because that's what ultimately determines whether you can scale good judgment consistently across the business. If your data's messy, if your processes aren't documented, if your training is influenced by whoever sat next to the new hire, AI can't help you. It just makes the mess move, faster. So, we put the real work into the foundation. We rebuilt how we onboard reps. We tightened up how deals get reviewed. We got disciplined about how we capture and how. I'm sorry, what we capture and how. And really, that's the work that lets everything else compound. So it's not about the part about anybody puts on a slide. It's the part that matters.
So, um, I am really curious about the foundation because that's something that we deal with a lot when we're working with companies. And I love that you're purposely avoiding the shiny object temptation, which is all around us. There are thousands and thousands of options today. We're surrounded by abundance. And so even like when it comes to credit quality, our quality of judgment matters when we're making credit decisions, but it also matters when we're choosing how we're going to employ technology to help us achieve our business goals. And so it's really interesting to me that you're intentionally going after the unglamorous aspects of business, or even you said something really interesting. The moat is in the boring layer.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I was spending 2 to 3 hours a night, 5 days a week, spending 5 to 6 hours on weekends, and I just found that there was just too much stuff out there, and like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the shiny toys, and I eventually found out that there's just a lot of stuff out there that you can't believe everything you read, and I learned through trial and error that you have to be very intentional and it's important, and you have to also follow the right people. I think that was my biggest thing, when learning AI, is this: I needed to make sure that I was following the right people and learning from them as well, as opposed to just seeing a bunch of tweets and seeing favoriting or bookmarking something that I really liked. And again, I had to be intentional because there's just a lot of bad information out there. Everyone tells you that you can make millions of dollars using AI, and I just after trial and error, I realized that there's just a lot of bad stuff out there, and you have to be very careful, especially when you're working for a large bank like ours. So we have to make sure that of course protect our reputation as well.
Yeah, well, I think you bring up a really important point, and I think that there are probably a lot of leaders in our space and beyond who are grappling with the same challenge. There is this overabundance of hype, and there's an overabundance of information, both good and bad. And, I think one of the key challenges of our time is not more information or more awareness of the trends and the pace of change, but really discernment,
Yes.
leveling up our discernment. What do we believe? Why do we believe it? And where do we place our precious resource, which is our energy and our time? So I think that you bring up a really important point. How do you choose to focus on the areas that matter when so much is possible? Can you kind of share a little bit of your thought process? Like what led you to say, of all the things I could do, this is where I need to focus?
I think it all started. As ChatGPT I think came out in 2022, and since then we've got the Groks of the world, we got the Claudes, and many others out there, Gemini's, and really it came down to just back testing everything. And what I've done is I've basically taken the same prompts and put them through different chat bots and long language models. And I've basically, and also, I've watched a lot of videos online. And I think my biggest my biggest takeaway is this, that I need to stick with what works best for us, right? And I've found that Copilot has done really well. I think they've made some improvements, but I use, personally, on a personal level, I use Claude a lot, and it's just a lot of back testing. And
Yeah.
for example, we've been looking at our training curriculum, and we felt that we needed to update it because it hasn't been updated for a few years. And we put our training curriculum through some of the different long language models, and some of the results that we're seeing are just incredible. I mean, AI has come a very long way since, I think, November of 22, when ChatGPT came out. There's just so much you can do and so much information you could feed to it, to help refine it and get it better. And you know, I think I remember a conversation that I had with you a couple of years ago where we talked about,
I
I was,
remember this.
yeah, I Converge. I was trying to leverage ChatGPT to take some of the stuff some of the great stuff that you had in some of your book, and I thought it worked. I looked back at it, I thought it worked, but it didn't. But now, just what you can do with AI, it's absolutely incredible. So yeah, I mean, really, at the end of the day, again, as I mentioned earlier, we're very intentional, and we want to make sure that we're putting out the best information possible, getting the best results, back testing as much as we can, and making sure that when we put something out to our team, they're confident in what we've put out, and they're going to use it.
So this is a really interesting use case, and actually, a couple of years ago, I remember talking to Miles about this at an executive roundtable. We were imagining new possibilities with AI, and the group that I was working with, this was one of the challenges that we were tackling. Like, what can be done to help quickly onboard new people into equipment finance and sales and training. And so it's interesting that you're working on a use case like this. There's so much possible with AI. I'm curious, what sort of response are you getting as you're starting to test this with real humans now?
Yeah, the response has been very positive. We created a financial analysis prompt. We created a bank statement prompt, and we've tested it. Looked at it. Tested it over I'd say probably a couple hundred applications, and the results have been great. We've of course had to have different multiple iterations just to make sure we got it right, but the feedback has been great. From a sales rep perspective, it's been incredible. I got to tell you, our team is using it a lot more and adopting it a lot more than I expected. And it helps out with a lot of things, whether it's researching a client, finding another decision maker, whether it's to refine an email, how to best handle an objection. All that stuff has been so good for us. And other areas where we've used it, I mentioned earlier, was the training curriculum. You think about this. We've had a training curriculum, for several years now, and the biggest challenge about building out PowerPoint decks is just making sure that you get all the branding, the formatting, correct, and then incorporating. For example, we used a sales book called the Challenger Sale, and we created a question and answer benefit document, and we incorporated that Challenger Sale book into that. And my assistant sales manager just wrote a prompt and told me exactly what they were looking for. And context really matters, when it comes to AI. It's really
Yes.
important that you feed it, as much information as possible. And of course, you can always go back and change things, but it's incredible what it can output, and the results have been great. It's not perfect, but the way we look at it is what would take us 5 6 hours to do a PowerPoint presentation, right? Or whether it's from scratch or redoing a PowerPoint presentation, and just thinking about it, it literally took us no more than 25 30 minutes. And this is me doing multiple iterations. So I mean, if it got it right the first time, I would have probably done it within a matter of 10 minutes at most. So I think about that, and it's creating more efficiency. It's allowing us to spend more time with our salespeople and doing other things that we weren't able to do. This is the boring stuff that AI is solving for, and I absolutely love it. And I'm trying to incorporate AI as much as I can, within our organization.
It's interesting. You spoke earlier about scaling judgment at high speed, and part of that is figuring out where it makes sense to systematize judgment where you can. But there are always those outlier scenarios where you're going to need a human involved, and you're going to need human judgment and intuition and all the things that human wisdom, which is hard to systematize, brings to the table. But I think the interesting thing, what you talked about, like, let's leverage AI to tackle those boring things. There was nothing more mind-numbing and boring than having to sit 5 or 6 hours with a PowerPoint presentation. And now you have
Absolutely.
freed up 5 to 6 hours for a human to bring their judgment to the table for more high-value situations. And, like, what a wonderful thing that is. Um, I'm curious though, as you've really like dug into this, and you jumped into the deep end pretty quick with AI compared to many other leaders across our space. And I'm curious, was there a moment along the way where the complexity of this work that you're doing forced you to maybe rethink your approach, and what might have changed as a result?
The rethink moment was realizing we'd been thinking too small. We started out using AI the way many leaders do, to make ourselves and our teams faster emails, faster summaries, faster prep. Really a smarter intern, basically. The shift happened when we built that first real underwriting prompt. We watched it produce analysis on a deal that was as good as what our best credit minds would write, and it did it in seconds. And the next time and then time after that, we sat with that for a while. Because the implication was significant, it meant the question we'd been asking, how do we make our reps faster, was the wrong question. The right question is, how do we make every rep operate better? How do we develop their judgments and their skills of those of other better reps, so that high quality decision making isn't isolated to a few individuals but embedded across the entire team. So that changed the work structurally. We stopped thinking about AI as a feature you bolt onto a workflow, and started thinking about it as a layer the workflow gets built on top of. It changed how we approach training. Instead of asking reps to memorize product structures, we're equipping them with tools that contain the knowledge that they can spend their time doing what humans do best, right? Which is sit across from a customer and build trust. It changed how we think about hiring. The profile of the rep we want 5 years ago, from now, is going to be different from the one we want today. And it really changed how where we spend leadership time as well. So we've been doing a lot more building than we used to, because the leverage can be so high. And when we invest the time to get the tool right, everyone on the team, benefits quickly.
Can you kind of give me a picture of what that looks like? Because it is quite an investment to commit to this. I love that you're asking those big questions. I mean, changing up your questions and rethinking even the questions that you're asking is such a game changer. But when you mentioned that you were glad that you actually invested time to get this right, what did that look like for you? What was the time investment like for you, your team, your salespeople? Can you kind of bring a little bit of like what's the reality on the ground?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I've spent a lot of time with AI over the past couple of years, and I've we have a leadership meeting, every week with my sales directors and assistant managers. So it's always on our agenda. We talk about it, areas where we can, improve and make sure that we can onboard our sales reps faster. So, for example, the way I look at it is, in terms of like time, I would probably say we've invested close to, I mean, me personally, I've invested, a couple of 100 hours, 'cause I like doing stuff on the, on the side as well, just for fun, just learning. But I'd say, we spend about an hour, hour and a half, every week for the past couple years. And I would say we probably dedicate about 20, 30 minutes just to talk about how we can improve things, like especially with our training, Deb, there's just, especially for someone, just coming straight out of college, doesn't know anything about leasing. The one thing that we fixed was there was just so much information that we provided them in our training curriculum, and it was like drinking from a fire hose. So, you think about this, a lot of, sales organizations, they'll cram in as much information as possible, right, into their training. And we're not big believers in that. And so what we did is, for example, we have modules now that we've created. So I'll give you one for example. We have Salesforce, 101. Then we have 201 and 301. So instead of teaching them everything on every subject, we spread it out in different modules, and that's where I believe that AI's helped us out, because we've been able to take that information that we had, and we were able to separate it into different modules, and then refine it and just make it better. And one thing that we've noticed too over the past I'd say 12 to 18 months is our onboarding has gotten so much better, in not just in seeing the results in the numbers, but also just our sales reps are retaining the information better. And we've used a lot of, we have a very strong tech stack. Over the years we've used Gong for conversation intelligence. I would say that it's probably one of the most valuable tools for us, because it's allowed us to not just listen to the calls, but we've built trackers. We've also, built, a library of call recordings that our sales reps can listen to. And if they don't want to listen to it, we have transcripts, and it basically summarizes the transcripts, and it allows them to, instead of having to listen to, let's just say, one or two calls a day, they can now read the transcript or read the summary, and they can pick up certain things that other sales reps are saying, and they can look at probably 9 or 10 versus one. So just, again, it goes back to just being more efficient.
There's so much in just this story here. So first of all, I love the way that you're able to not just throw away all the wisdom of the past, but you're actually able to take it, refine it, update it to be more relevant for now, but repackage it with the human experience in mind. How do people learn? It's not about taking all of the information in all at once up front. What's the half life of that knowledge that's going to stick with you? It's pretty dang short these days. And so I
Yeah.
love the whole approach to thinking about how humans actually learn, and the onboarding experience. But the other thing that you're doing that I think is so powerful, and I think that our listeners need to pay attention to, is the power of learning and community. That punctuated repetition that you have throughout the year, you're spending at least a half an hour with your team talking about what are you seeing, what are you learning, how is it going with AI. This doesn't take
Absolutely.
it doesn't take a complex program. It doesn't take a lot of fancy technology or anything. You're having a human to human conversation. And this is one of the accelerators for AI adoption. And I think people really underestimate the value, and you're doing it, naturally, as you're bringing your leadership skill to the table. But the thing it's doing, though, that I'm picking up on is it's actually improving the human experience. And that's, I think, where we're going to get the best benefit from AI, because it is possible, as you've seen through all of your experimentation, to systematize and automate a lot of things. But if you forget the human experience along the way, you could have built something that leverages AI and looks like it's efficient, and the human experience is terrible. And I just
Absolutely.
actually
Yeah.
experienced this myself with Amazon. They're using a lot of AI and algorithms and robots and touting just how efficient agentic AI is in their organizations. So this really happened to me, just happened to me, like dealing with it this morning. I ordered, I posted it on a LinkedIn too, because I'm like, everybody needs to see this, as this is a great example of tech first trap. So I order 200 books for a speaking engagement that I'm appearing at. And so I usually do this like a month in advance. I order the books from Amazon, the author copies. I get the books, then I can sign them or put my bookmarks in, whatever we're doing, and then package them and send them to the event organizer. And, my goal is for them to have a great experience receiving my books and sharing with their audience. So I order 200 books, and I'm expecting, you would expect reasonably, that you're going to get like a box
Right.
or maybe two, maybe up to four, depending on how they package. And I know there's automation involved in how they package. What happened is yesterday, the first book started arriving, one book at a time, each with its own package, shipping, tracking, notifications. I am now tracking 49 separate shipments
Oh my
for
gosh.
a single order of 200 bucks. And when I got like the pile of 22 packages yesterday, I've got many more that I'm chasing around today. Um, I looked at it and I'm like, no human designed this. This was not designed for the human experience whatsoever. I don't know what they're trying to optimize with this algorithm, but it definitely had no thought to what my experience would be trying to track all of this. But like, have they really saved anything with
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
automation? They just added like so much overhead to a tiny, tiny deal. Like, I'm just astounded. And so, like, I love the way that you're thinking through the human system as well as the processes, the policies, and the things you're trying to achieve. You were saying you've been having a lot of adventures with AI as we were starting this call, and I wanted to dig into that a little bit. What are you seeing these days?
So, I helped my son and his best friend start a business a couple weeks ago. It's basically a apparel business. I'm trying to teach my son how to become entrepreneurial, learn how to be a little bit more. He's a bit of an introvert, but trying to get him to be more outgoing, start networking. You know. And so, him and his best friend always talked about starting a apparel business and just selling custom T-shirts and hoodies, and they've done their research. And so, what was incredible is I got them started. I bought their heat press, bought them their printer. But what's impressed me most over the past, couple weeks, I'd say probably past month and a half is, Claude Design, just came out. And one of the things that we were talking about was to help, ramp up their business was let's think about certain holidays. So, for example, we thought about making T-shirts for Mother's Day. And so, the challenge always is finding the designs, right, and then creating a landing page, for that, for those designs and the mock-ups and all that stuff. And what was unbelievable? I mean, it took a couple hours, but I still felt that it was meaningful, and we generated, I think, over 2 dozen sales because of this. But what was amazing is I used several websites to find designs that we purchased for the Mother's Day T-shirts, and then basically I went into Claude Design. I asked it to create a landing page for their website, and I fed it how much each shirt's going to cost. Told it that I needed to have two different versions, a black T-shirt, a white T-shirt, and within, I'd say, 45 minutes, I had a full landing page with 20 different T-shirts that people could buy. And I'm just amazed, something that would probably take you 2 weeks to do. Like I don't know anything about coding, and what would take me 2 weeks to do, Lily was done in an hour. Of course, I had to go back and forth, but just it's unbelievable what AI can do these days. And so that's just one example. I can sit here and tell you so many stories and how much I'm leveraging AI with my kids on a personal level, and go on for 2 hours. I mean, here's another quick story. I have a 12-year-old daughter, and I have a 15-year-old son. And, I'm a big believer in, children need to eat, sleep, breathe AI right now. If you don't, you're going to get left behind. And so what I did was I, did a lot of research, found a course on YouTube, a beginner's course on Claude, Claude, not Claude Code, but Claude Design, but just Claude, and just understanding how to use it. And it was a
Are you
47
doing the
minute.
one through Anthropic, or did you find something else?
No, I found one on YouTube. It was an influencer,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a lot of, it was the way when I find stuff, right, to me it's important that they have a lot of subscribers,
Mm-hmm.
the likes are high, and the view count's good, and it's also recent because, as you know, AI is moving so fast. So
Yeah,
what was
yeah.
what was funny so my son finishes his course, and I look at his notes and I'm like, did you really learn anything? I'm like, look at your notes. And then, my daughter, goes through the course, and she's got 2 pages worth of notes. Okay. So then I used Claude. I said, you know what? Here's a YouTube video. I want you to analyze this video, and I want you to create a 15 question quiz on this YouTube video. Of course, my son, scores a 13 out of 15, and my 12-year-old daughter scores an 8 out of 15. And I'm like, how did this even happen? So it was really interesting. Yeah, my kids use it, sometimes if they don't understand anything, at school, and they're trying to figure out a question. So my daughter creates quizzes for herself. So does my son.
Oh,
They
that's
create
awesome.
flashcards. So, I'm really, really trying my best to get them to embrace AI, and just to understand that, it's just going to just help you, at school. It's going to help you, in the future, in your career. You may find something interesting that you may have not have been interested in before. So really hoping that they continue, over the summer to embrace it, and, use AI for many different things, just like I do.
Well, I really love that you're getting your kids involved. This is actually a really important issue societally is how do we make sure that kids are understanding and embracing using AI in ways that actually improve the human experience, like using it to help you learn, not do your homework for you. Because
Exactly.
in one instance, we're actually improving our thinking and we're improving our capability. In the other, we're offloading and surrendering to AI. And so, which part of that line do you want to be on? And I think it's important to, provide that guidance where you're helping them understand that the actions that you're taking now are shaping your future.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So along the way, Rich, what are some examples of maybe assumptions, beliefs, or habits that you had to change to make meaningful progress with AI, whether personal or in business?
I will say that I have to thank, Miles Herman, our CEO, because, one habit I had to break was delegating. And that was the most interesting work downward.
That's interesting.
I was always the big, believer in the old school mentality. If you want something done, you do it yourself. And that was a hard habit to break for me. And, so, for most of our careers, the playbook for a leader has always been pretty consistent. Hire good people, set the strategy, create the conditions for them to execute, and just stay out of the weeds. That's still mostly right, but I believe that AI has challenged one part of it for us. What I realize is that some of the highest leverage work right now is hands-on, building and piloting test cases that give us a better insight into how we sell and how we underwrite. And when we get that right, it can make newer salespeople stronger and great salespeople better, which is one of the most practical ways to close the performance gap across a large sales organization. Sorry, when we invest a Saturday getting a tool right, every rep on that team can be better by Monday morning. There aren't many leadership activities that can produce that kind of return. One belief that I had to let go is that strategic leadership and a hands-on building are separate things, right? Right now, with this technology, they often show up as the same work. Leaders who recognize that and are willing to build alongside their teams are likely to be in a different place in a few years than the ones that kept waiting for someone else to do it.
Actually, this is a really important point you're making here. And it's actually one of the things I did a whole chapter in my book about this. This is the power of co creation. That's what's happening here. You're not only co creating with AI when you're spending your Saturday to get a new tool or process or training material right for your reps. You're co creating with machine intelligence, but you're also co creating with your team.
Absolutely.
Huge, huge power in that because you're not only creating the tools, but you're also upgrading a shared mental model of how business works and what's possible and what might be next.
Yeah, and employees appreciate that too. I'll give you an example, Deb. We had we still haven't solved for it. We're trying, but we had a gentleman that is one of our top sales reps, and we reached out to the team, and we asked if anyone wanted to get involved in creating prompts and working with us, and he stepped up to the plate. He said, hey, Rich, I'd like to work on creating a prompt where it analyzes our invoice and loan documents and checks for any mistakes. And it was incredible because we have a gentleman at Leaf that is piloting and being the champion for us, for AI and teaching our entire organization how to use Copilot. And so instead of me taking that information that he created, that prompt, I said, you know what? Instead of me doing that, I want to empower you, and I want you to work with our Copilot champion. And the prompt that they came up with together, oh my gosh, Deb, I can't even tell you how incredible it was. So it's great. And people feel appreciated when you give them an opportunity, to work and put together something that's meaningful that just doesn't help them. It helps the entire organization.
Oh
And
my
so,
gosh.
that's our goal. I created a team about, I'd say 6 or 7 months ago, and we call them Synergy Syndicate. And we have 3 different sales teams. And basically, sometimes, employees, don't always want to speak up. So what we did was we took 3 sales reps, one on each team, and basically they gather feedback from our salespeople because, again, people don't always want to speak up to management. So we said, you know what? We'll have you guys meet with the employees every quarter. If there's any ideas that the team has or anything that we can do to improve, not just office culture, but our training, the leads, whatever it is, to make this a better place. Please gather that information, bring it to us, and we'll act upon it. And then the following quarter we meet and we just talk about some of the feedback that was shared with us, and what we've been able to do to accomplish some of the things that they asked us to get done the previous quarter, and the feedback they gave to us. So for us, culture is very, very important. I think our average tenure in our office is just over 9 years, and that's
Wow.
very hard to find in,
Yeah.
in a sales organization. And so we're very proud of that.
I feel like you're like a billboard for Enter the Tomorrow Zone. Another chapter was on Empower, and I'm seeing you do that. But what's interesting in your story, Rich, is like all of the skills that you've learned in sales and building a sales organization that's so dynamic but also successful. One of the pieces of that is continually being out there with your customers, understanding your customers and understanding the market. So like sales, you're always out there building relationship and doing ongoing market research, so to speak. But you're actually turning that internal now when it comes to AI. So what I'm seeing that you're doing is really interesting with this syndicate concept, and having people sort of be like the ambassadors and getting feedback and stuff. You're constantly doing internal market research and
Yeah.
generating continuous buy-in because you're involving people in the process, but you're also showing progress, and you're not only building these tools and skills, but the empower thing, what's so powerful about it is you're creating a capability that's shaping your future because, it's not just building that one rep, you're building an organizational capability. That's really powerful, and I think I'm curious to see years from now how that shows up in retention, but also attraction as you're
Yeah,
building
yeah.
your team.
We're excited about the future. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I can see. Well, you're shaping it actively through your actions. So, I mean, that's a really great segue to my next um, topic. And I wanted to talk a little bit about momentum because even with the thing you're doing and with your regular meetings and learning together and groups and feedback, you're generating a lot of momentum. So, as you move forward, what changed along the way about how you made decisions or allocated resources or involved different stakeholders? Because I know you've got a pretty big domain of responsibility at Leaf. So what did that look like?
So, two things changed meaningfully. The first is how we think about resource allocation. The default in our industry is when you want to grow is to hire, more reps, more underwriters, more support. We still believe in hiring great people, but we've become much more willing to invest in enablement before we invest into headcount. For example, we've almost tripled, what we're doing from I'd say from 2018, 17, 18, and with the same amount of people, if not less. Because, a tool that makes 44 reps 10% better is worth a lot more than the next rep I hire, especially when the goal is scaling judgment, not just scaling headcount. The second thing is how we involve the team. I talked about that earlier. We primarily involved in a learning phase. Now we bring people in much earlier and we intentionally pull in the skeptics, because when a rep, who's been doing this for 25 years looks at a tool and says, yeah, that's actually how I think about it. It carries far more weight than leadership simply saying that this is the future. So, really in our industry, the adoption curve is likely to be driven by the veterans, not just by the early adopters. So we spend a lot of time making sure we build, what we build, earns their respect.
That's such an important concept. You're thinking about adoption from the start, not as some bolt on activity later on when you mandate that people have to do this. That's magical.
Yeah, it really is.
You mentioned earlier that you're really excited about the future. So I want to dig into that a little bit. We are in the tomorrow zone here. So as you look ahead, Rich, what feels most critical to get right next to maintain long term relevance?
Right now, our AI work is probably the most powerful in batch, analyzing a deal, building a training module. The next frontier is real time, in the flow of a rep's day. For that to work, our Salesforce data, our email, our call data, our pricing, all of that has to be unified and clean enough that AI can be useful in the moment, on the call, in the email draft. It's not a trivial lift. It's where a lot of the investment is going because real time enablement is ultimately what embeds decision quality directly into the flow of a reps every day.
Love it. So, this has been a really fun conversation. It's so fun to geek out with you and just
Oh
see,
yeah, I love
all
it.
the progress that you're making. Then we could probably spend hours on that, but we're already to the lightning round here. So I've got a few quick questions for you. Just looking for short responses, no overthinking. And I'll just start with the first one. So this is a fill in the blank. Long-term relevance requires blank.
The willingness to rebuild what's already working.
Oh, wow. Can you say a little bit more about that?
We're very structured. We've got a great tech stack. It's been working. And now what we have to do, and as I mentioned earlier, is we just have to look at what we've built already and just make it better. Whether it's our training curriculum, whether it's the data that we have that we're capturing in Salesforce. One of the things I think about now is conversation intelligence. When a sales rep's on the phone they're typing up notes. Now with with all the great tools out there, sales reps are not even have to take notes anymore, and that's what we love. The fact that now AI is going to basically be able to listen to that call, summarize that call, and basically, if a sales rep makes the second, third, fourth call, the sales rep, all they have to do is just type in a prompt, a simple prompt, tell me about my last call or summarize my last call, so they don't have to waste time going through all their notes in Salesforce and trying to figure out, what they're going to say on the call. Everything is going to be just done for you. And so I believe that we're going to be a lot more efficient. And I also think about credit as well. I believe that it's really important to know your deals, and I believe we're going to get to a point where we're going to get deals approved quicker because we're going to make sure that we train our sales reps to put together good deal write ups. And if they have a good deal write up, credit's not going to spend all this time researching that company and coming back and returning that deal and asking more questions. The more you do up front and the more information you provide credit, just the process is just going to get a lot easier. So that's just two examples. I really believe that we're going to be a lot more efficient, and AI and technology is going to play a big part in that.
It brings to mind something else for you because you were talking about your goal of scaling judgment and improving judgment at scale, but also I think the other thing that you're doing that I'm seeing from the outside looking in is understanding. You're accelerating understanding, the depth of understanding to make great decisions or build great relationships with your customers. AI is actually accelerating your ability to do that, whether it's knowing your customer and remembering the last conversation and continuing where you left off to build relationship and connection, but knowing your deal and the depth of understanding to actually make the right decisions along the way in real time. This is really powerful stuff, Rich. So back to the lightning
Thank you.
round.
Okay. Hey,
In one word, what one word best describes what this work has demanded of you?
perhaps you know the work is iterative. You try, you fail, you refine, you try again, and it's all in service of the people on the front line.
Absolutely. I love that. Get in your reps. So, a signal or shift that you believe leaders might be underestimating right now.
We've seen it already. A junior rep with the right AI tools is going to out leverage a senior rep without them. And it's going to happen faster than anybody in this industry expects. That changes, how you hire and how you train.
Absolutely. And it probably would impact how you lead as
Oh,
well.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Last question for you. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground, and I imagine it probably feels like you've lived, 10 lifetimes already just in the past 3 years since ChatGPT sprung onto the scene. But looking back, what do you wish someone would have told you before you started?
The model is the easy part, Deb. I think, your data and your workflows are the hard part. Start there, even though it's not the fun part. I think that, the more time you invest into your workflows, the better off you're going to be, down the road.
Awesome.
And your
And
data,
I
and your
totally
data.
agree. Totally agree. Rich, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, my pleasure. And thank you for having me, Deb. I'm glad we got to get together.
Yeah, yeah. I'm glad this worked out. So, to our listeners, I really hope that you enjoyed this conversation, that you took away some wisdom nuggets from Rich's story. And if you're serious about shaping your future inside your organization, I encourage you to start with my book, Enter the Tomorrow Zone. And if it sparks some ideas, reveals gaps worth exploring, reach out to us at tomorrowzone.io. We would welcome the conversation. Thanks again for listening. As always, we encourage you to like, subscribe, and share if you find value here. Stay curious and choose to make awesome happen.